Part 1. Love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. Without collective change, no change matters. Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams Sensei. Getting intentional. Before getting into this critical work, it is imperative to get clear on why you are here. This helps you to check in to see if you are showing up for authentic reasons and serves as an anchor you can use to return to whenever shit gets hard. And trust me, it will get hard. Read the affirmation below, and when you're ready, write or otherwise record your answer as a stream of consciousness. Note whatever comes, and then review, revise, and cut down as necessary until you have a clear, concise statement that you can then return to as you move through this work. I am ready to learn about spiritual activism, fight white supremacy, and do better because for me, the reason I'm doing this work is because when I left my faith after 46 years of believing my entire life, it felt like a shattering to discover the lies that were underneath, and it was incredibly painful. And to be able to come to a place where I feel peace-ish, and I'm still working on it, has been incredibly opening, and my heart has never felt more big and full of love. But at the same time, I was hearing repeated messages that I still had so much more I didn't understand, and I hurt people that I was close to, friends, because I did not understand. I did not see and understand how white supremacy had such a great hold on who I was, how it was such a part of being raised as who I am, that it was so ingrained in me that I had no clue that it was even there. And then I finally started to see pieces of it and understand a little bit of it, and I could see it outside of myself. But it wasn't until I started to have somebody ask me the questions that made me realize that the way that I was raised in the church was directly meant to help uphold white supremacy. It wasn't something I chose. It wasn't something that I was even consciously aware of. I wasn't raised in an openly racist area or places that had white supremacist groups. But I still was raised in a way that suppresses connection, authentic, vulnerable connection with others. And all of this is meant as a way to numb who I am and the human being that I am, so that I can turn around and support the systems that uphold the dehumanization of people, which is something I was blind to too. So this work is important because I want to heal that part of myself, to discover the human being that never got a chance to breathe, that never had a chance to grow and connect with people in a way that I have had longing for my entire life. And I only know that it's through healing that part of myself that is going to allow me to stop inadvertently causing harm that I don't mean. And it's going to allow me to have the foresight to be able to see how my actions or inactions, my silence upholds the system and how I am supposed to. I can't fight something if I don't understand it. I can't help fight for the relief of oppression if I don't understand how I am upholding the oppression. And that's why this work is important. Because if we don't get that root cause out and understand how just being American, just being raised as a white person in the United States of America, in Christianity, under capitalism, has set me up to uphold this system that I don't want. And I don't want it. I want to have authentic human connections. I want to have meaningful relationships. And I can't have those if I'm self-sabotaging. Chapter 1, Me, Myself, and I. I'm going to tell it like it is, and I hope you can take it like it is. Malcolm X. For most of my life, my biggest fear about addressing white supremacy was being rejected and abandoned for naming the realities of my oppressed experience as a queer black woman, which has come to fruition more times than I'd like to recall. I have personally spent a lifetime feeling alone and misunderstood. I struggle to find places that accept me as my whole black womanly self, and people willing to listen and engage with my truth, one steeped in navigating a white supremacist world as the pervasive other. From the tender age of 4, I was aware of being treated differently due to my blackness and girlhood. At daycare, my white caretakers locked me outside in the pouring rain all alone. In kindergarten, my white teacher attempted to hold me back a year from kindergarten, explaining to my white passing mother, who the teacher erroneously assumed had adopted me, that my black brain just wasn't as large as my white classmates. It was a sentiment derived from her teacher's manual in the year 1989, and this educator deemed it solid ground from which to assume I lacked the intellect required to, I don't know, play with friends or say my name. It was fucking despicable and racist. Luckily, my mother was having none of it, and I was placed in a first grade class after she threatened to sue the school board. Though I only knew about this incident after my mother shared it with me in my adulthood. I distinctly recall knowing that I had to prove my intellect to others from first grade onward, that those around me, be they teachers, administrators, or friends, would assume that I was slow because I was a black girl. I would look around my mostly white classroom and feel myself caged within 4 walls, void of safe spaces, tangible or otherwise. Nobody looked like me. No one cared to understand me or my experience. I felt entirely alone, like an ugly duckling, deemed visibly undesirable and socially unsavory. Often remaining silent for fear of saying or doing anything to garner my black body unwanted criticism, I disconnected myself from my surroundings, internalizing my heartbreak at being subjected to an onslaught of stereotypes. I vowed to excel and exceed all expectations of me whenever and however I could. I thought I could accomplish my way out of the black box I had been placed in, and became completely committed to controlling the narrative to try to achieve my way out of a form of discrimination I did not and could not yet grasp was deeply entrenched in the hearts and minds and institutions of all those in my midst. Needless to say, I was continuously disappointed by the impact of my efforts. And with few resources to make sense of it all, at just 5 years old, I assumed the oppression I faced was my own making, that I was treated and perceived differently by all those in my community, including people I loved, because I was the problem. Growing up in Western Canada also meant being constantly compared with Black Americans. I was referred to as African American by non-black folks for most of my upbringing. Another way of being othered. But the truth is, the only place I felt truly free to be myself was visiting my auntie, uncle, and cousins in Washington State. A mere 2-hour drive south presented an alternative universe of black love, black food, black pride. I didn't know the extent at the time, but all these glimmer of black American joy were a salvation. As a black girl from a financially insecure single mom led home in the culmination of my stereotypical existence, with the racist rhetoric of white supremacist status quo, left me feeling incapable, unworthy, and undeserving. My blackness made whiteness uncomfortable, and I was treated as the culprit for white folks' discomfort, continuously made to feel too loud, too emotional, too boisterous. I learned to tone myself down, to keep quiet, play it safe, and never, ever speak my truth or prioritize my comfort or well-being above that of my white counterparts. In the rare moments I veered off course, I was met with racialized harm in the form of emotional violence, which rocked me like a kick to the head. Sticks and stones have never broken my bones, but words, they've really, really hurt me. I shrunk into the sliver of space deemed acceptable for a black girl in a white world. It is a survival skill that stuck with me at all facets of my personal and professional life, and one I continue to process and unlearn 3 decades later. 3 decades later. One of the many privileges afforded to white people by white supremacy is the ability to simply be who they are without perceived negative stereotypes regarding intellect, ability, class, criminal history, language, origins, or otherwise thrust upon them strictly due to the color of their skin. From as far back as I can remember, I have walked to a long room and to be acknowledged for who rather than what I am. To simply be Rachel before being a black woman, but that is not my reality. Reflecting on this now fills me with unimaginable anguish as I yearn to reach out to that little girl who felt alienated and isolated for nothing more than breathing while black and femme. I want to hold her and let her know that she is not wrong, but the system sure as fuck is. I want to shake my white teachers, friends, parents, and demand that they address their misogynoir and stop causing this black child so much harm. Mostly, I want to tell my younger self that, though she deserves better, this is how white supremacy works. And it breaks young black, indigenous women of color down so early and efficiently that we often spend a lifetime swimming in a cesspool of trauma, self-harm, and internalized oppression. The racist assumptions and stereotypes like those I endured from toddlerdom are not abnormal. Quite the opposite. They are, as white supremacy is, entirely run-of-the-mill. I think that's something that we forget about oftentimes, is that just because it may be something that is new to us, me, as a white woman, doesn't mean that it's shocking, doesn't mean that it's unusual. It means that I myself have just been sheltered. It's not the experience that I'm learning about. That's the shock. What's the shock is how sheltered and ignorant I have been. That's the shock. White supremacy is not merely white men running around in white hoods in the wood. No, it is the air we breathe, and the more of us, the more white people in particular, are finally taking note of its stench. It is intentional and often unintentional, individual and collective, permeating every institution all over the world, from health and education to military and politics, and the impact begins from youth. The Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequalities 2017 report contains data showing that adults view black girls as less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers, especially in the age range of 5 to 14. 5. I can't. 5. Oh my God. 5. We would never look at a white girl and think of a 5-year-old child, a 5-year-old white girl, as an adult. And we would never treat a 5-year-old white girl as an adult. But we are going to be more likely to view black girls at the age of 5. Wow. Black girls receive harsher punishment at school compared with their white peers, and are further perceived as needing less nurturing, less protection, less support, and less comforting, and as being more independent and knowledgeable of adult topics than white girls of the same age. In sum, black girls are not viewed as girls by society at all. In Canada, young Indigenous girls are 21 times more likely to die by suicide than their white counterparts, and with several Indigenous communities declaring states of emergency as a result of the ongoing suicide epidemic. Clearly, I am not alone in enduring the pain of white supremacy from childhood. Black Indigenous girls are not getting the support they desperately need, and this is due in part, if not entirely, to systems of colonialism, patriarchy that have stripped us of our childhood and deemed us less worthy of care. Millions of melanated girls like myself have grown up ostracized and oppressed because of the color of our skin, and millions more and millions more still will, unless we as a collective do something to change the oppressive systems as they currently exist. Millions of melanated girls like myself have grown up ostracized and oppressed because of the color of our skin, and million more still will, unless we as a collective do something to change the oppressive systems as they currently exist. The truth is, to be black and indigenous and a woman is to be in a state of constant grief and rage. As James Baldwin said, to be a black person in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in rage almost all the time. Consciously and unconsciously, I'm infuriated over the reduced pay I earn for doing the same work as my male and white women and femme counterparts. I mourn the ability to express myself without being automatically discounted for being angry, to simply have my words received. I am traumatized by the frequent accusation of being overly dramatic when I name misogynoir. I am enraged by a culture that still purports that all lives matter. And I grieve over the racist shit my well-intentioned white friends spew out all too often. It is not a pity party, for the record. It's just the facts of my life and the lives of so many other black women. Facts are... If I sound angry, rest assured it's because I am. As a therapist and healer, Dr. Jennifer Mullen said, when the exhausted, abused, and traumatized and the exploited are denied access after access, rage, and all that goes with her energy are acceptable responses. Let me read that again. As therapist Dr. Jennifer Mullen said, when the exhausted, abused, traumatized, and the exploited are denied access after access, rage and all that goes with her energy are acceptable responses. And as they say, if you are not angered by the injustices of the world, then you are not paying attention. Or perhaps you just don't care. But black and indigenous folks, young and old, are dying emotionally, spiritually, and physically every day at the hands of white supremacy and of all those perpetuating it. Not caring is a privilege we simply cannot afford. Alone on an island. White people are hypocrites. They are barbaric. My guess is that you might have been met by a host of big emotions as you read that. Am I right? I was too. It was August 2017 when I first watched the clip of a young man make that statement during a TV interview. I had just returned from a weekend away with my then mostly white friends. The same weekend of the now notorious Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. When I viewed the news coverage of that fateful day, my heart was thrust into a state of all-consuming ache as I heard him utter the word barbaric. I was met with a wave of widespreading and conflicting emotions. First came the affirmation. The Black Lives Matter protester had just called out the same group of people who, over the course of my lifetime and for the lifetime of my ancestors, had treated us as less than solely for being black. And he had done so on live television, to a white person's face for all to witness. And then came the pang of deep and penetrating grief. Grief from a loss from the omnipotent trauma of BIPOC individuals, specifically Black and Indigenous folks, who have been murdered, lynched, imprisoned, enslaved, assaulted, discriminated against spiritually and mentally, emotionally and physically abused at the hands of white people for centuries. My face felt flush with righteous rage as I reflected on the pervasiveness of the problem, the widely held but frequently disguised racist beliefs held by those with power and privilege, the widely held but frequently disguised racist beliefs held by those with power and privilege, and their collective unwillingness to do a damn thing to truly change it, the very reason the events in Charlottesville were taking place to begin with. And then there was the fear for this young person's life and livelihood, that in a moment and for his foreseeable future. Fear for this young person's life and livelihood in that moment and for his foreseeable future, as well as shame, anger, emotional violence I knew would undoubtedly arise as a result of speaking his truth without apology and defiantly calling it a white supremacy out. As I sat back in my chair, I released a long and labored exhale. I recounted all the times in which I had brought my truth to white people, when I had spoken up about the ways in which the systems of white supremacy have hurt me and those like me, and all the times I was consequently rejected, ignored, insulted, and often by the white people closest to me. I found myself overcome with emotions because most horrendously violent events that had taken place that weekend, as well as the bravery of this young black human and the way his words resonated so deeply within every bone of my being. Still, I was confused. I had just spent an entire weekend with white people. I was raised in a predominantly white community, and most of my friends at that time were white. And I have white family members. Hell, 25% of my ancestry is white. Was it fair for me to name all white folks hypocrites and barbarians? As the Black Uprising advocate in the news clip attempted to finish his first sentence, more grief ensued. The news anchor, through his white lens, lied and said the black man wished to kill all white people. As it commonly occurs, this dignified black soul was met with a murderous enemy, made out to be a murderous enemy to the state, an angry thug on a mission to cause white people harm. But that's not what he said. He called white people barbaric, but he did not say they were all bad people, nor did he assert to wish any of them harm. Without so much as a thought, white supremacy translated this man's expression of pain, the collective pain shared by myself and black folks, and many black folks, as a criminal, deviant, and dangerous, just as enslavers the world over had done centuries before, and just as an American Jim Crow had upheld for decades afterward. It was an intentional, albeit often unconscious, defense mechanism white folks wield to guard them against having to actually listen or do anything about the truth. That no matter their intentions, all white people perpetuate a collective and institutionalized system of white supremacy created by white people, which benefits all white people to the detriment and oppression of all BIPOC individuals, particularly Black and Indigenous women. And that is fucking barbaric. Period. In the same way cis men have a history of acting barbarically towards women, femmes, and feminine folks, hetero folks have a way of behaving and the way that hetero folks behave barbarically towards LGBTQIA plus community, non-disabled folks have behave barbarically towards disabled folks, and so on. We are all barbaric in some fashion, and part of our spiritual journey is being with that reality, processing the shitty feelings that arise when we confront the harm we've caused ourselves and others, and doing the work required to demand better. What I believe is this bereaved activist was saying, what Black folks are constantly having to say is that on the whole, white people hang us out to dry, which in fairness is an improvement from when they used to hang us from trees. And they still do. Dark humor. White folks constantly demand that we beg, plead, and fight for our humanity to simply be recognized. When we audaciously assert the right to live, breathe with the same freedoms as white folks, we are denied, ignored, and attacked. This struggle is constant and the demand incessant, even when white folks are entirely unaware of the task they put before us. Yet again, a Black brother was put on the spot to do exactly that and plead for his right to simply exist. The only difference in this instance was that he wasn't having any of it. This righteous renegade was otherwise in the midst of a standard exchange with whiteness, one that silences Black struggles and prioritizes white comfort. It is an exchange that I've endured time and time again, including that very same weekend. As thousands of alt-right white supremacists and Black Lives Matter protesters descended upon Charlottesville, I was at a friend's cabin, well, more like a mansion, on an island near my birth town in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a typical weekend with wealthy white folks, and I was the only Black person there in my friend group, and often one, if not the only BIPOC for miles. The weekend was full of reading and relaxing. That is, until I woke up on Sunday morning and checked the news. I saw a woman ran over, murdered by white supremacists in his car. I witnessed neo-Nazis violently assaulting and terrorizing Black men and women, and I heard the 45th President of the United States proclaim there is blame on both sides. I felt every cell in my body simultaneously howl in horror and retreat with remorse. Every tear, every bigoted remark, every hateful blow was housed deep in my soul, and I had not been there that frightening day in Charlottesville, and yet in so many ways I had. I made my way through the corridor of the island estate and descended the stairs to find the weekend crew lit and lively in the kitchen, going about their morning as if the world weren't on fire. But of course it was. I knew people were in the hospital. Black folks worldwide, especially Black Americans, were hurting on every level of every kind, and I was unsure how to process it all as I sat in the middle of $1 million cabin on a tiny picturesque island surrounded by other white folks who were entirely oblivious, or worse, unbothered by the situation down south and its implications for us all. The lack of awareness by those in my midst left me feeling isolated, angry, and disheartened. It was as though the trees lining the estate had equally sheltered the home as well as its inhabitants. So I did what had become my salvation in times like those, times when I felt like nobody around me understood my experience walking in the world as a Black woman and navigating white supremacy on the daily. I shared my pain publicly online with total strangers. because it felt less agonizing than attempting to ask the white people in my immediate vicinity to give a fuck about racial violence and its impact on black women right in front of them. That is the honor and acknowledge of my humanity, and in the trauma that naturally arises from bearing witness to yet another example of white supremacist terrorism on black people, my people. The often unintentional, the often unintentional but entirely harmful avoidance of race-based issues by white folks results in my isolation and erasure of my experiences. It leaves me and so many other BIPOC individuals feeling as though white people don't understand our experiences, nor care to try. So what would be the point of us speaking up? In predominantly white spaces, I often feel as though it's me, myself, and I. Who is often the only person giving a damn about the BIPOC individuals? Me. Where can I turn for support? Myself. And who bears the brunt of the silence, of white silence? I. Sitting on the couch away from the crowd, I hit post on Instagram and went upstairs where I sat on the bed and bawled. Alone and away from the callous community downstairs, still whooping it up over eggs and bacon. I was on an island within an island, a world of pain that nobody in my presence would dare explore with me. Me, myself, and I. Was it possible that they simply did not know? Obviously. But with the incessant media frenzy for our times, to be unaware is a choice. One made to prioritize white comfort at the exclusion and expense of all others. Read that again. With the incessant media frenzy of our times, to be unaware is a choice. One made to prioritize white comfort at the exclusion and expense of all others. Later that day, the hostess for the weekend, my closest friend there by far, saw my post and tried her best to acknowledge my pain in person. As she sat next to me on the couch and fumbled her way through something akin to consolation, I was appreciative of her attempt. Still, as it typically occurs in exchanges with whiteness, I found myself exerting all the emotional labor. I felt compelled to induce or suppress my feelings in order I felt compelled to induce or suppress my feelings in order to sustain the outward countenance that produces the proper state of mind in my white friend. That's the definition of emotional labor. To induce or suppress my feelings in order to sustain the outward countenance that produces the proper state of mind in my white friend. I think that's important to call out because a lot of people use the term emotional labor without understanding what it means. AKA, I had to exert hella effort to make sure that she felt safe during our chat about my race-based pain. And this wasn't the last time, less than a year later, I spent a week consoling her after several of her close friends were racist to me during her bachelorette. For BIPOC individuals, white supremacy regularly has us engaging in conversations about our oppression in a way that comforts our oppressor and upholds our oppressive status quo, which results in furthering our oppression. I left the interaction at the cabin both sad and exhausted. I did my best to enjoy the day, but my pain couldn't be contained. I cried standing along the water's edge, my salty tears falling to meet the salt water beneath me. But all but one person took notice. And for a moment all but one person took notice, and for a moment stayed with me as I cried in earnest effort to affirm the pain pent up in my chest. Other than that, my white friends did fuck all. Mostly they avoided me. That's the problem of racism and their implication in it at all costs. And it hurt. We quickly returned to the sheltered structure of the cabin, and the sheltered lives of my well-to-do white friends marched on. And therein lies the crux of the problem, of the issue with white people. As a result of their privilege and protection afforded by whiteness and white supremacy, can and will continue to turn away from racism, to choose not to engage, which is an active choice not to care. I believe many of the white people in my midst that day cared for me, but they cared about themselves and their comfort more. They were trained to, just as I was trained to prioritize the needs and well-being above my own. White supremacy plays out in a small way and subtle way, just as potently as it does in large and grandiose actions. A group of young white folks in Western Canada, wholly unmoved by racist acts of terrorism and who ignore their black friend in distress, is in no way disconnected to a group of right-wing extremists who parade and punch in the name of white pride. All of it is violent. All of it perpetuates the white supremacist status quo and causes BIPOC individuals harm and alienation. Further, Dr. Shirin Masood has shared that the Charlottesville riots Further, as Dr. Shirin Masood has shared, the Charlottesville riots reified another fear that such blatant displays of racism and xenophobia would work to downplay or mask less apparent, more insidious acts, racist attitudes and behavior. I'm going to read that one more time. The Charlottesville riots reified one another fear that such blatant displays of racism and xenophobia would work to downplay or mask less apparent, more insidious racist attitudes and behavior. Because we as white people will always be quick to point out the racist acts of violence that we can see, rather than to confront the way that our silence and complicity and comfort is just as violent. Charlottesville sent reverberations of racial unrest down the spines of people around the world. But there is little that is exceptional about the anti-black terrorism, as the double pandemic of COVID-19 and 400 years of black genocide have made clear. White supremacist violence has endured for centuries and will continue to endure unless and until we all, particularly white people who created and benefit from these systems, demand that it ends. Though there have been countless instances of racist rallies worldwide throughout history, and undoubtedly more to come, there have also been incalculable harms inflicted against black folks, particularly queer and trans black women, by our well-meaning loved ones. Emotional violence can leave bigger bruises than physical acts of assault. Still, like many other black people, I've spent much of my life failing to name these harms, as that brave young man did in Charlottesville, and for damn good reason. It was and is not safe. Had I spoken my truth to the white people in that tiny white island, I no doubt would have been met with a regalia of racist resistance. I chose to be more or less silent about my pain, just as they chose to be silent about my oppression. It's no coincidence that many, if not most, black anti-racist educators and activists were raised in predominantly white spaces. The immense harm we endured growing up in the throes of whiteness fired us up to not only fight against racial injustice, but to dedicate our lives to doing so. I still frequently feel alone. I have yet to locate the mystical land of Wakanda, where I can be my boldest, blackest, and freest self. But I have come to realize that for now, such a space must exist within. I can embody the freedom I wish to create in the world, and I believe it is my calling, as bestowed upon me by Spirit and my ancestors, to share my truth and the truth of so many black women, past, present, and future, to mobilize to others to create a tangibly safe society for black and indigenous women worldwide, a space where our experiences will be welcomed. If there's any chance for equity, it is to If there's any chance for equity to actualize, people need to listen to the realities faced by the most oppressed. Mm. Here we are. We all need to start sharing our stories with those different from ourselves while calling out oppression, actively listening and questioning our perspectives, even and especially when it makes us uncomfortable. I want to witness a world where white folks and non-black POC are willing to risk their lives and livelihoods in support of black liberation. And in the same way black women have been risking our lives and livelihoods, all of our collective freedoms, for all of our collective freedoms, excuse me. For centuries, black women for centuries, a world where black women, especially queer and trans black women, no longer have to lead the charge at the front lines of critical global change. I want black women to be able to rest and heal. Excuse me. The collective liberation requires black liberation, and black liberation requires all of us, particularly those currently possessing the most power and privilege, white people. Make no mistakes, I still fear the harm that I will undoubtedly endure for speaking my truth. My work, education, and training in racial justice do not and cannot inoculate me from feeling pain. I am in no way immune to the backlash that has already taken place and that is sure to ensue. For those who will blame me for speaking my truth and then drag my name through the mud in an effort to ruin me and my reputation. The many, mostly white folks who no longer speak or associate with me, and all those to come. The death threats that will continue to fill my inboxes. All of this and more is just another day of existing as a queer black woman fighting racial injustice. The very act of writing this book is a form of activism and estrangement. To be an outspoken and unapologetically queer black woman is to be a lightning rod for loathing. I have been slammed with every racist stereotype one can imagine. Angry, uppity, divisive, too black, not black enough, too emotional, too loud, too much, too everything. Still, I must write, and I must write my absolute truth. Indigenous lands continue to be stolen and destroyed. Black folks are still subjected to state-sanctioned slaughter in the global streets. Both black and indigenous folks are dying at the high rates due to COVID-19 and anti-black and anti-indigenous pandemics. Governments are ruthlessly terrorizing those that are defying inequitable systems of power, and the shit is only getting worse. There's too much at stake for us to stay quiet. Ooh, boy, has it ever gotten worse. All right, so spiritual soul care offering and call to action. Naming our fears. Our first soul care prompt creates space for you to illuminate your own apprehension around racial justice. Find a quiet space and reflect to ask yourself this question. What is my biggest fear or frustration about addressing white supremacy? Please close or lower your eyes and take note in your mind of any words, images, or emotions that emerge as you ponder this question. Maybe a memory arises. Perhaps you feel tension in your jaw. Now open your eyes and jot down what came up for you below. If you are able to, for this exercise and those to come, try writing with your non-dominant hand. This helps you to get out of your head and into your heart and practice non-perfection, because it ain't pretty. So here's the writing prompt. My biggest fear or frustration about addressing white supremacy is being alone, not having my family understand me, losing them again. I've already lost them because of religion, and now I could lose them because their unwillingness to recognize their white supremacy. Because people don't like being called white supremacists. They feel like this tightness in their chest. I feel it in my shoulders. Like it tightens up. I feel it in my stomach. That's the next prompt is, where do you feel it in your body? I feel it in my stomach. I feel it in my shoulders. I feel it in the back of my head. And my heart beats fast and my eyes go blurry. And sometimes there's ringing in my ear. Naming our biggest fear and our frustration lets us deflate some of its power and in turn create more space for us to hold space, show up, and do the work. Notice where this lives in your body and how and when it gets activated as you move through this book and through the work. That's in chapter 1.